of the Flower Moon, starring Robert
Cold as ice.
De Niro as William Hale, Leonardo DiCaprio as Ernest Burkhart, Lily Gladstone as Molly Burkhart, Jesse Plemons as Tom White. This film was directed by the phenomenal Martin Scorsese, and because it was, the law states that this is a film and not a movie. Martin Scorsese has a long history of highly notable films such as Goodfellas, Taxi Driver, and Gangs of New York, to name a few. Killers of the Flower Moon is an Apple TV original, but it's also available in theaters, which is understandable for a film of this magnitude. Apple TV also has a show called Severance that I can't express how great it is. Go watch it, under the radar series that need a little light shined on it.
Warning, this content contains extreme spoilers and beyond.
Now back to Killers of the Flower Moon. This film starts off with a Native American ceremony, I think might be a funeral. After the ceremony, a black substance,
Oil, that is, black gold, Texas tea,
bursts forth from the ground, making the folks of the land stupid rich. So they start balling out of control. Ernest Burkhart enters the film, arriving on a train, and is greeted by a man who takes him further into the film to William Hale, played by Robert De Niro, who is on his A game that we all know he is capable of despite some of his roles in lesser movies. Just a mention of a DiCaprio, De Niro led film directed by Martin Scorsese is enough for a lot of people without knowing anything more. William basically schools Ernest about how things are around town. Cut to someone listing off a group of the dearly departed.
Did you see what I did there?
Whose deaths are questionable. Back with Ernest, he picks up Molly, seemingly much like an Uber driver or more like a taxi service. They talk and kinda hit it off. At home, Ernest studies up on the Osage culture. I tried to find out if this was a true story or based on actual events. It seems to be. It certainly looks like something that would have happened in American history, given its track record. William tells Ernest, who is his nephew, to get with Molly, but looking at it as financial gain. And it would seem to be the move a lot of guys in town bust for that reason. Molly really likes Ernest and invites him to dinner and get to know each other. And the way Molly is acting, I don't think she's smoking tobacco. She tells Ernest something I only ever heard my grandmother say to me when I was a child. She said, "Be quiet because it's stormy." I guess to pay this greater force respect, a habit I've never picked up. At the reception, a guy busts dope moves on the dance floor as William speaks with Molly. Ernest and Molly grow closer, being together around town, and for genuine love, they get married. Later, at a funeral, Ernest is asked to leave for some reason, which I'm sure will be made clear at some point, and talks with William, who tells him to make sure he gets the head rights from Molly. That will ensure that he inherits all of Molly's assets should she die, which is something that is suspiciously common around town. Things get chaotic at a gathering when Molly's sister drunkenly stirs up trouble with Ernest's brother, who later offers to drive her home. Then in the next scene, she's dead. The Osage are fed up and elect to get some outside authority to investigate the obvious. So it turns out Ernest is into some underhanded criminal activities, including grave robbing. This earns Ernest a Masonic paddling from William, who once more pressures him about the head writes. I neglected to mention that all through this film are very quick snippets of violent acts. They're not out of place, but they are sudden. They give you glimpses of the types of things happening around town, which I think is cool, helping the story along. William appears to be the head of this criminal organization with his hands in many pies. He has instructed doctors to routinely inject Molly with medicine for her
diabetes.
Molly eventually rejects. Apparently, this being one of William's pies, scheming on the Osage with these doctors. But I do believe that Ernest truly loves Molly and wouldn't willingly do anything to harm her. An Osage man driven to alcohol due to his cheating wife beats the lover and is arrested. Now a ceremony for the Osage grandmother passing in a beautiful and tranquil scene. Later at a dinner, Ernest announces Molly's pregnancy, although I think it's her third. Ernest then talks with William, who displays his fork-tongued talent in planting ideas of doubt and mistrust of Molly in Ernest's head. The investigator is mentioned, but I'm pretty sure he got beat up and sent packing a while back in this film. Ernest sets up the man who was arrested earlier, whose name is Henry, due to what William said. So like many other Osage, he was killed, but not in the way instructed. It was supposed to look like a suicide. Ernest relies on that guy that botched that last task with another. Later, while Ernest and Molly are asleep, they are startled awake by an explosion in the neighborhood that blows the windows out. In the wreckage, a man screams for his death with a deceased Osage woman laying near. Molly, done with all the rampant murder of her people, lets out a cry of hurt and pain pushed to her limits. She personally sets out to retrieve an outside authority to investigate the obvious, getting a quick moment to plead for help to the president directly. He doesn't respond and walks off, seemingly not to care. Molly is growing sicker despite her injections. There's a knock at the door which Ernest answers, and Molly's plea didn't go unheard. Tom White of the Federal Bureau of Investigation is here to investigate, requesting to speak with Molly. Ernest tells Tom White Molly is unavailable due to her ill health, and Tom leaves for now. Tom White makes his rounds around town speaking to William briefly, running into dead ends due to anyone to question are previously dead. But one townsman does say something that leads to the arrest of Ernest. Tom tries to get Ernest to implicate his uncle, but he uses the screw-up to take the fall instead. Molly's health worsens with her people rushing her to a real hospital as Ernest is put into protective custody. Another man who was arrested is willing to testify against Ernest and William. Ernest is allowed time with his wife, who is looking much healthier now. Court proceedings take place with great performances from John Lithgow and Brendan Fraser. While in prison, Ernest receives the terrible news of one of his children succumbing to lung complications. After the funeral, Ernest decides he will testify against his uncle, and he lets him know once back at the jailhouse. In court, Ernest tells all about everything he helped his uncle do. Afterwards, Molly, who has just learned all this, asks Ernest about those injections she was receiving. He says was insulin. Molly stands and quietly walks away. We learn that later Molly divorced Ernest and moves on with her life until she was 50 years old. William Hale received a life sentence but only served up until 1947, released for good behavior. The movie ends with the Osage tribe chanting and drumming. I highly enjoyed it and I certainly recommend watching it. I love how it starts off with subtle hints of the dark underbelly of the town of Fairfax, slowly cranking it up till it was blatant throughout the film's runtime, which is long, but great pacing and great acting make the time unnoticeable. The ending scene leads me to believe this film wanted to pay respects to the Osage tribe. I think this was a much needed change in quality compared to most movies that have been releasing lately, and another excellent film in Martin Scorsese's filmography. I'm Ron Stringer. Hound at me about something else some other time.